And there we go. So briefly, just to introduce ourselves as a business. So we are, as I say, a consumer research platform. We exist to allow anybody who is consumer-facing, even B2B, B2C, to connect with your audience, to better understand and make decisions with confidence by connecting with 110 million consumers across 49 different markets. That might be in day-to-day decision-making, it might be building audience profiles. But ultimately, what we want to empower people with is a platform to enable continuous insight, to get to that Jeff Bezos imagines 70% knowledge before you can make a decision, to include data more regularly. And one of the benefits of being a research platform is creating proprietary research, which we're here to share with you today, and learning specifically about brand purpose and what that means to Gen Z, how you can better understand them, what challenges you're inevitably going to face, and the kind of tactics that you can take on as you build a picture of it. So when we talk about brand purpose, I would imagine if we were to ask what does brand purpose mean for everybody in this room, there are going to be, I could count the number of people, it would take far too long, but most people will have a different opinion. Some people will think of social responsibility, CSR. Some people will think of ethical supply chain. Some people will think of my brand purpose is to deliver the product and the functional value that I deliver to people. But what does that mean to Gen Z? And as I say, one of the benefits is we can run that research. So we sent out a survey to 2,000 people in the UK to ask them what they thought, rather than just living in our eternal echo chamber that we may all operate in on most occasions. What we're looking at here is a question that has been refined. So for those of you at the back, you might not be able to see the greyed out area, but the dotted line is the national average. So on average, we can see that the functional purpose of a brand was most important to people everywhere. When you start digging into the data, what we've refined this to is Gen Z. So the greyed out area shows you the difference between functional, national average, most important to everybody. Gen Z specifically, functional is important, but having clear values, whether that is to be inspirational, to provide innovation, is equally important. Standing out from competition, not necessarily that interesting to people, but still relevant. And it's about how a brand makes you feel. So the responsibility with Gen Z is to make them feel inspired, to do more, have a mission, care about it, but also deliver a great product, which just goes to show that the challenge we're facing here today in a market which is ever-changing and ever-developing. And I will hand over to Sam.
Okay, thanks very much, Tom. I was just thinking, actually, that it's probably been 2 years since I've spoken to an audience like this. I've been spoilt with Zoom, where you have notes and prompts for the last 2 years. So hopefully I've got everything in my head and I won't miss too much. So yeah, we were really interested to see what Generation Z's approach to brand purpose, their views, and how they want it communicated to them. So we ran some research. So we spoke to 500 Generation Z consumers in the UK, and it was a nationally representative sample. So what did we find out? First bit was, what do Generation Z want from brands? So let's have a look. This is a bit of a busy slide, so let me take you through it. First of all, we asked our Generation Z respondents to rank factors when they choose a brand to buy from. And you can see all the factors there on the slide: value for money, a well-known brand, good consumer service. When you think about it, when you take a survey and you rank something, if it's your top ranking thing, you put it in position 1, your second ranked thing, you put in position 2, etc. So if all of our respondents put, for example, value for money first, we'd see a number 1. But of course, not everyone does. So these numbers represent the aggregated view, or the aggregated ranking of each of these things. So having a look then at what Generation Z ranked as important factors, we can see value for money and quality of product service was the top ranked. And then we have got good customer service, making shopping with them convenient, and then about equal, I've always bought from them, so the loyalty aspect, and then a brand with a purpose that's wider than their business at 5.2. What this is showing us is that these hygiene factors, value for money, quality of product service, even customer service, are not being outstripped by the brand purpose. These are still important things to Generation Z. And one thing that I quickly wanted to mention about online consumer research, before we move on to the next slide, and it's very important when we look at these results, is if I was to point out one of you in the audience and ask you to stand up, Don't worry, I'm not going to do that. But I would ask you to rank these factors, and you would feel pressure from me, you'd feel pressure from each other to answer in the right way, the correct way. We call it social desirability bias. But of course, when you do an online anonymous survey, that bias is lessened, so we get a much more accurate picture about what people are thinking. Okay, let's dig down a little bit more into this question. Same question, same audience. But this time we can see it broken down. So we can see that value for money, we've got 31% ranked that first. Quality of product service, 33% ranked that first. And if we drop down, we can see brands with a purpose, and we can see only 8.5% rank that first. Well, am I right to say only? If we look at it forensically, we can see that nearly a quarter ranked it in the top 3. So brand purpose is still a very valid thing to this audience. One last sort of take on this same question. What's very important when you're looking at a generation, Generation Z, baby boomers, millennials, is to remember they're not one homogenous group who all think and feel and act in the same way. So when you have data like this, it's really important to dig down into the different demographic groups or different behavioural groups. What I've done here is I've just looked at the London-based Generation Z respondents who answered our survey. And you can see that their answers are slightly different. Quality of product service, far more important. 41% rank that as the most important factor. Value for money, less important at 24%. And if we move down to brand purpose, we can see it's slightly higher at 13%. So when you're looking at data like this, although an overall view is very important, it's sometimes very interesting to dig down into the data. Sometimes there's differences, and sometimes there isn't. Okay, I think we've had enough of that question. Let's move on to our next one. So please rank the below traits in order of how important they are to you in a purpose-driven brand, with 1 being the most important. And again, this was all 500 Gen Z respondents. So we can see, if we're looking at how many are ranking each trait first, affordability, top of the tree there at 44%, environmentally friendly, 22%, fighting for change, 15.5. I never know whether to round that to 16 or not. I'll say 15.5. Ethical trading, 11%, and then charitable business at the bottom at 7%. Now, affordability, you can see that I've summed up the slide with affordability ranks highly, but not to all. The reason why I've said that is because if we have a look at where everyone has ranked affordability, obviously we have that massive amount in first place. Massive amount, very technical term there. 15.9% second, 13.3% third, etc. And what I'd expect to see is the numbers drop. But you can see there's a little kick at the end with 16%, a higher number than ranked third and fourth, who are putting it at the bottom. So we can see there that affordability is more polarized. To some, it's very important, but to a not insignificant amount, it's the least important of what we're looking at. One thing that I thought was quite interesting is how sort of low charitable business model is ranking, and it got me thinking, because obviously a lot of the big hitting brands out there do base a lot of their marketing, a lot of their brand purpose around charitable donations. But I think it's because it's very vague here. I think the generation need to know what the charity is, how much is being donated. So detail is very important, is the takeout we can look from there. Okay, next question. Communicating with Generation Z. So we have a brand purpose. How should we communicate with the Generation Z consumer? The way we did this was very simply. We offered the 500 respondents 3 statements, and we asked them to select which statement resonated most. So the 3 statements: I'm happy for brands to communicate their purpose-driven work with me. I'd rather find out by myself, and then I don't want to find out. So it'd be really easy for me to stand here and say, oh, look, over half are very happy for you to communicate directly. Off you go and sort out your comms plans accordingly. But actually, I think we need to approach it from the different angle. Actually, only half want to be communicated directly. The rest either don't want to be communicated at all or are happy to find out for themselves. So again, it's that whole idea that it's not one homogenous group. Some want to be communicated in some ways, and others want a more discreet approach. And it's very important for you to understand in your consumer base, both directly and wider, who wants what from you. So we took that 54% and we asked them, okay, you don't mind being communicated directly, so how do you like to hear from brands about their purpose-driven work? Select all that apply. So we can see brands' social media accounts, brands' own websites are at the top. I suspect that's not a surprise. I was actually pleasantly surprised, I think, by adverts and email. Even though they're ranking third and fourth, they're still high percentages. I thought email perhaps was considered a little intrusive these days, but apparently not to nearly a third of the Generation Z consumers. Friends and family, even though it's at the bottom, again, it's still nearly a quarter. And I love the idea of creating a buzz around brand purpose to make sure people talk about it and learn from each other. Okay, who's getting it right is the final question that we're going to talk about today. So we did this very simply. We had an open text question, which means there's no prompts in it. The consumer can write whatever they want. And we asked, which brands do you think have a strong social purpose? And then the respondent just typed into the box which brands they thought did. We took the data and put it into one of my favorites, a word cloud. I love a word cloud because it's really easy to see what brands are popping out. I don't think anyone's surprised to see Nike there, but there were some other interesting ones. We can see Gucci, Tesco's, Primark, Apple, and when Tom and I had a look through this, we had a little think about why some of those were appearing.
So not that I'm particularly fashionable, but took the interest in the fashion brands because some things really stood out to me. And the two primary ones, just touching on Nike as a brand, everybody knows that it's a global behemoth. But realistically, one thing that they do, so I don't know if anybody has a pair of Nike shoes, but if you bought a pair of Nikes, you'll notice that if you go to purchase the same pair the year later, it's going to be really difficult to get hold of them because they release a new product every single time and they're always innovating on that. They're pushing the boundaries. That's what they do as a brand. That became incredibly frustrating for me. And I always wondered, where does that stock go to live? Are they doing a Burberry and they're burning it? Or are they actually waiting and biding their time because they've got a long-term picture and a genuine consumer understanding? Lo and behold, there I was, scrolling down whatever social media platform I was on a while ago, and I got a pop-up ad for Nike Drop. It turns out that they've been storing up their stock to create scarcity campaigns. So the trainers that I wanted to buy that are no longer available are now on this innovative little app called Nike Drop, and that is relevant to the consumer that they are targeting as Gen Z. It's creating scarcity, and it's associating with brands like Depop, which I'll come on to talking about Gucci. But just by really understanding their consumer, looking at the resources they have available to them, old stock, want to get into mobile apps, trying to reach a different audience who are willing to spend a little bit of money on something that they really love and that they value, Nike Drop turns out to be a brilliant innovation. So long-term planning is really difficult for a lot of people to think about, especially when it comes to quick turnaround campaigns. Gen Z are always on the move, they're ever changing. But actually looking up, taking a step back is going to be really powerful. And the other one I thought stood out was Gucci. Gucci with Gen Z, really premium, as with a lot of these brands. They are trying to find a way to connect with a younger audience who might only be able to buy one product every 6 months, 12 months. They're in a decentralized marketplace because of things like Depop, Vinted, eBay, and they don't have complete capacity to own their brand journey. Imagine that as a challenge in an ever-changing marketplace. But by actually pulling together and doing things and recognizing that where they can reach people on their social media feeds, on the campaigns that they're creating, they should be talking about their brand purpose. And they recently created something called Gucci Equilibrium. I'd encourage everybody to go and have a look at it. But they are more mission, purpose-led when they are talking to their consumer than they are buy from us, here's 5 products, here's your call to action, here's your empty basket. They're moving away from that. They're a premium product. It's not the brand that they associate with. But that is innovation and looking at a bigger picture, which is really, really innovative. And it just shows to me that they've taken time to think about it. And I will hand over to Sam to talk about a retailer, a food store.
Okay, so the final discussion point for today is the standout food retailer. So if you were looking at that word cloud carefully, you might have seen Tesco pop out. And why I thought about Tesco is I think it's a really interesting brand that has done a lot in the last 2 years to subtly change its perception of itself and its consumers' perception of itself. So if we think about Tesco a couple of years ago, it was a little bit, can I say brash? It was all price, low price, slash prices, bright colours. And I think it's very clear that over the pandemic, they kept a pulse on consumers and what consumers wanted and needed from them. And we've seen a very clever shift from that sort of price slashing reputation to someone who really cares about their consumers and really cares about their employees. And I think that is now the perception that we have of them as a brand. And I think a lot of you will remember the very clever social media campaign that they did when the pubs reopened. Gosh, that seems so long ago now, even though it really wasn't. Where they said, actually, we don't want you to come into store to buy your alcohol to drink at home. We'd rather you went and spent your money in the pub. And I think such a selfless message from that particular brand has really resonated well with the Generation Z audience, which is why we saw them on the word cloud.
So, to summarise, and I think we may be short on time, so questions very welcome to come and find us. We've got a stand around the corner. But some key takeaways for today, and the one that I think, looking back, Sam mentioned it was about 2 years ago since we've been at a public speaking event, real life event. One of the key benefits of being live is I don't have to listen to myself back on a webinar recording. But in that talk 2 years ago, we were speaking about Gen Z as well. And one statistic that is growing and ever growing, and a reason why you should take understanding this audience incredibly seriously and try and understand the bigger picture. Back then, I think it would have been just over 2 years to the date of Festival of Marketing, and the overall market value or spending power of Gen Z at the time was approximately 60 billion. Enormous market. There's opportunity there. You want to spend time building a picture of it. Everybody can have more than enough revenue coming from that. That has now more than doubled to just under 150 billion as global spending power of Gen Z. There's a perception that they're potentially not an audience that have enough money to buy our products. That's not true. They are willing to spend money on premium products for brands that are doing things that they care about. So the overall challenge is going to be, you've got to be a great product, but that's not number one because there are lots of great products, but you have to be talking about your purpose, you have to be talking about your mission, and you have to stand for something. So just throw a spanner in the works, you really need to be doing all of those things, but ultimately if you spend time understanding and researching them, you'll be able to do that.
The key takeaway from me, I probably have about 10, but I don't think there's time for that. So the main one for me, I think you've heard me mention it a couple of times, is that a generation isn't one big mass that think and behave in the same way. Just like any generation that's gone before, there are differences, segments, behavioural traits that are all different, and it's really important for you to understand that and treat them as such. And I think that is it.
It is indeed. Thank you very much for taking the time. Any questions, please do let us know.